So just a quick video to show one or two of the lesser known features of the Chroma Polaris synthesizer. First I want to talk a little bit about what some people have called the pseudo effects of the synth, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how this synth really turns into a very cool monosynth using the glide function and how that relates to the selective pitch bending. So anyway, first off, the sort of pseudo effects. Some people have talked about the extent to which there's sort of a phasing effect that you can get out of the oscillators, and you can really hear it. But first, let's get a pretty normal sound. This is a pretty standard sound. And one thing that confuses a lot of people about this synth is the bipolar slider. So right now I've got the slider on detune. I've made sure to take off any filter envelopes, any pulse width modulation on the sawtooth wave, which is, even though it's a strange thing to call it, that's what it's called in the manual. And basically I've made sure that there's no oscillator 1 vibrato, oscillator 2 vibrato, or oscillator 2 envelope, just to make sure there's nothing else weird going on in the background. I've got the detune slider activated, and it's one of these light blue buttons. Basically, the difference between the light blue buttons and the dark blue buttons is that the light blue buttons make this sort of assignable slider, the light blue buttons make it a bipolar slider, whereas the dark blue buttons make it a unipolar slider. Right, so the unipolar sliders go from 0 at bottom to maximum at top, but the bipolar sliders have 0 in the middle, and there's a different function for above, middle, or below the middle. You can see that on many of the other sliders because of the difference in the shading, right? Your bipolar sliders have light blue shading on top and the bottom, whereas your unipolar sliders have darker blue shading from the bottom all the way up to the top. So let's go back now to detune. It's set to, somewhat medium-sized detune here, but the difference is that when the detune is above the middle, the detune is uneven across the keyboard versus even across the keyboard. And the manual says if you want to get certain phasing type effects, you want your detune even across the keyboard. So right now I've got it standard medium amounts of detune so that you can hear what you do with any other synth where you just detune your oscillators and it makes it kind of fat sounding. Well, that's too much obviously, but... And that sounds pretty normal. I've also just retuned my oscillators so that you can hear these effects. And now what I'm going to do is rein in the detune, and as I do that you're going to hear it get quite phasey. And there's no weird effects going on here. This phasing is just kind of normally what the Polaris does. Modulation going on in the background. I've made sure to take everything off. There's no filter envelope, nothing. I've got my cutoff at full, my resonance is at half. This is just what these oscillators kind of do with a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of detune. Now, if I bring the detune fully to 0, difficult to find fully 0 with the bipolar slider. But that's as close to 0 as you can get, and instead of it being locked in phase, they actually phase slightly in and out, which is kind of cool. If you add a tiny bit of vibrato to the oscillator at a very slow speed, you can try to accentuate it ever so slightly. To do that, but actually impact it that much. It's more that it transforms it back and forth between this more phasey sound and a sort of regular chorusing. Okay, so that's enough for that feature. I want us to now look at the selective pitch bend, which is kind of unusual on this. So we're going to a pretty standard pad sound here. Well, it's a resonance pad sound, but you get the idea. And if we go to the bend lever range function, what I'm going to do here is, again, this is one of those bipolar sliders where middle is 0, and then if you go up or down, it has a different effect. So if you go up in the amount, that's going to change your bend range, and it's going to do exactly what you expect it to do when you go up on the slider. And let me just extend the release time a little bit so you can actually the delay time, decay time on the envelope, so you can hear what it's doing better. I've got a standard sustain pedal. Well, you can use a standard sustain pedal. This one actually came with the Chroma, which it has 2 slots on it so that it can start and stop the metronome function with the sequencer, but you can use a completely standard sustain pedal. It works just as well. So if I use the sustain pedal, so that's now depressed, I can press the chord and just use the bender as you would expect normally. But now, instead of using the bipolar slider in the up direction, I'm going to bring it down instead, below the 50% mark. And what we're going to notice is that now only the notes which are depressed are going to be pitch bended by the mod wheel. The manual says that this was originally intended to do sort of pedal steel effects. But either way, it can produce some strange effects. So here we go. Notice it's only the E that's moving, and I'll accentuate that a little bit more so you can hear it. The rest of the chord is staying still. So if I do that, you can do stuff like this. Or like this even. Definitely kind of unusual stuff. Now, in relation to the glide function also works very differently than on other types of synths. If you look at the glide button, it's a dark blue button, which means it's a unipolar slider, so you bring the slider all the way down for 0. So right now there's no glide function at all. Bring down that release time a little. There we go. Okay, so now I'm going to use the sustain pedal. No, I'm sorry, not yet, not sustain pedal. I'm going to bring up the glide function, and you would expect the chords to move around the keyboard like they would on any other. But they're not. The reason why is it takes the foot pedal to engage that. But notice what happens when you just press the foot pedal. So here's foot pedal with no glide. Pretty standard sustain. But notice what happens when you bring the glide function up and you use the foot pedal. There's no chords anymore. It's now become a monosynth with glide engaged. And so the foot pedal actually allows you to switch between monosynth and polysynth. So basically, here's my chords. Here's foot pedal up, now foot pedal down. And so you can actually play them on top of each other, just toggling between them using the foot pedal. So you can do stuff like this. Okay, now, how does this become useful? Well, it's useful in the way I just showed, but it's also useful to turn any sound into a standard monosynth sound. And there are very few very few monosynths that have the sort of modulations that you see in a Chroma Polaris. You can get some really amazing monosynth sounds. So just to demonstrate a couple of these, this is a pretty standard one, mind you. You just go to your glide function, bring the glide function up, and now use the foot pedal. If you assign mod wheel vibrato, you can have that as well. But you can do this also with just incredibly strange sounds that have many more modulations than you would have on a normal monosynth, unless it's maybe an ARP Odyssey, but even then. So here's a much stranger sound. All you gotta do is go to glide, bring up the glide function, and hit the foot pedal. And of course this works great for coming up with some bass sounds as well, so let me see if I can find something that's a little bit more suited for bass. Not that. Okay, something like this, I'll just sharpen up the attack a little bit. I'm sorry, the decay. And now we just go to our glide function, bring it up, and hit the foot pedal. See, there we lost the glide function. Okay, so now I want to show how this especially sounds pretty cool if you put it through a 12 dB filter. So I've got this set up now going into this Mutable Instruments Anushri synthesizer. This is actually, I mean, everything Mutable Instruments makes is pretty damn cool. Olivier, the guy who runs it, is amazing. The forum there is really incredible. But anyway, this is a single VCO monosynth that also has one digital oscillator complemented, and it's got just a ton of modulation capabilities and a pretty sweet Rolandish 12 dB filter. So now what I'm going to do, I've got this set up to go through on another channel. I'm going to put this through. Let me just make sure it's on and working. There we go. So this is now being filtered through the 12 dB filter, and you'll hear the difference almost immediately. So let me just make sure. Okay, so right now it's doing it in poly, obviously, but as soon as I step on the foot pedal with the glide engaged, we're back into mono. And now I've got my 12 dB monosynth, and it sounds, I think, pretty cool and quite different. Sorry, I gotta hit the foot pedal to make sure that we stay in mono mode. And just playing around a little bit with the shape of the filter here. So let me, I just want to take down the resonance on the Chroma Polaris itself. I think I'm distorting a little bit into the filter, but that sounds great. And all of that is Chroma Polaris. I don't think I ever thought a Chroma Polaris would sound like this. And of course, you can add a little bit of, variation underneath the filter. And one of the nice things about the Chroma Polaris is that you can have your velocity control your filter. That starts changing a bunch of things around, but it's nice sounding underneath the 12 dB filter as well. Anyway, if you play with it, it can get pretty actually SH2 sounding, even without owning a Roland, obviously. And even though I think the Roland has a 24 dB filter, but it can sound pretty vintage in ways that you wouldn't expect, and certainly you wouldn't expect from a Chroma Polaris. Anyway, I've tweaked it before and gotten it to sound even more vintage, but this is basic enough so you can see what the potentials are. Have a great day. Okay, no video for this section, but just a little bit more showing what this sounds like through the 12 dB filter. I changed a few parameters to get it to sound a little bit more vintagey. Going now straight through the Chroma's filter itself. So now we're back to 12 24 dB filter. This sound is basically just sawtooth waves, slightly detuned with some resonance thrown in. That's about all that's going on here. And of course I've got the glide function engaged just to make it so that it's a monosynth. And of course the foot pedal's down, so that turns it into the monosynth. And now to bring up the 12 dB filter with it as well. So now this is both filters engaged in parallel. And series in parallel with each other.